The warning came from my 4-year-old daughter, whispering a secret she had promised a dead woman to keep. "Don't open the locked one, Daddy." I was 32 years old, the exact span of time the truth inside that wooden box had been rotting in the dark, when the latch finally clicked. I didn't just open a keepsake, I detonated the quiet lie that was my entire life. The fluorescent lights of the horizon path. Marketing office always hummed with a sound that sat right at the base of my skull. A constant reminder of the headache waiting to happen. It was a Tuesday in mid-October, and the trees outside the window were burning with the brilliant reds and oranges of a Midwestern autumn. But inside, I was drowning in spreadsheets and demographic breakdowns for a local insurance firm. My name is Claire Foster. I was 32 years old, and on most days, I felt like I was running a race where someone kept moving the finish line just a few inches further away. My phone buzzed against the laminate desktop, vibrating through a stack of quarterly reports. I glanced at the screen and saw the photo of my husband. Ryan. He was smiling in the picture, windblown and younger, from a trip we took to the Great Lakes before Mia was born. Now, 4 years into parenthood. "We rarely looked that rested," I answered, keeping my voice low so my boss, Dave, would not glance over from his glass-walled office. "Hey, is everything okay?" I asked. Ryan's voice sounded tinny against the background noise of his own workplace, a logistics warehouse on the south side of Maplebridge. "Mia has a low-grade fever," he said. "The daycare just called. One of us needs to pick her up." I looked at the pile of work in front of me and felt that familiar sinking weight in my stomach, the guilt of the working mother. If I left, I was failing the team. If I stayed, I was failing my daughter. "I will go," I said, already shutting down my laptop. "I can finish the projection analysis tonight after she goes to sleep." This was the rhythm of our life. Maplebridge was a good place to live. The kind of city where neighbors still waved and the schools were decent, but survival here required a constant juggling act. Ryan and I were a team, but we were a tired team. We were holding it together, paying the mortgage on our 2-story colonial, saving for college, and trying to keep the spark alive. But the edges were starting to fray. By the time I picked Mia up, strapped her into her car seat, and drove home, the afternoon sky had turned a bruised purple. She was lethargic, her usual boundless energy replaced by a whimpering need for cuddles. I set her up on the couch with a blanket and her favorite animated movie, then went to the kitchen to start dinner. My mother, Linda, called while I was chopping carrots. The ringtone alone made my shoulders tense. I loved my parents. I truly did. Paul and Linda Foster were the pillars of their community, the kind of people who volunteered at the food bank and kept their lawn manicured to within an inch of its life. But there was a weight to their love, a suffocating density that I had never been able to fully articulate. It was as if I were a fragile glass ornament they were terrified of dropping, yet they squeezed me so hard I felt I might crack. "Hello?" "Mom," I said, pinning the phone between my ear and shoulder. "Claire, you sound tired," she said. It was not a question. It was an observation that doubled as a critique. "Mia is sick," I said. "I had to leave work early." "Oh, poor baby," Linda cooed. "But really, Claire, I told you that daycare center was a petri dish. If you would just let me watch her during the week. We have talked about this." "Mom," I interrupted, trying to keep my voice even. "We want her to socialize with other kids, and you have your own schedule." There was a pause, the kind that was heavy with unspoken disapproval. Then, her tone shifted, becoming brisk and businesslike. "I am calling with news. The realtor called your father. Eleanor's house in Briar Glen finally closed. The buyers want a 30-day escrow, but they want the property vacated by next week for inspections. My grandmother, Eleanor." Even hearing her name caused a pang of complex grief. She had passed away 6 months ago, and the loss still felt like a missing tooth, a gap I kept probing with my tongue. Eleanor had been the one person in my life who did not treat me like I was made of glass. She was sharp, funny, and occasionally cryptic, possessing a wild streak that my parents seemed desperate to forget. "That is fast," I said. "It is." Linda agreed. "Your father and I are going up this Saturday to clear out the attic and the garage. We need you and Ryan to come help. There are boxes up there that have not been touched in decades." I looked at the carrots on the cutting board. Saturday was supposed to be our day to catch up on laundry and sleep. "I do not know if we can." "Mom," I said, "Ryan is exhausted, and if Mia is still sick—" "Claire," Linda said, her voice dropping an octave, "this is family. We cannot do the heavy lifting alone. Your father's back is not what it used to be. Besides, Eleanor would want you there. She knew exactly which buttons to press." "Fine," I said. "We will be there." "Good," she said, brightening instantly. "We will handle the important stuff, the paperwork and the valuables. You just worry about the junk." The distinction struck me as odd. "We will handle the important stuff." It was the same tone she used when I was a teenager and asked about family history, or why I looked nothing like either of them. A gentle but firm shutting of the door. Saturday morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky that threatened rain but never quite delivered. Mia's fever had broken, leaving her with a lingering cough, but enough energy to bounce in her car seat as we drove the hour north to Briar Glen. Briar Glen was older than Maplebridge, a town of Victorian homes and massive oak trees that arched over the streets like cathedral ceilings. My grandmother's house was a sprawling, slightly dilapidated Queen Anne painted a fading yellow. It sat on a hill, looking down at the town with a regal, lonely air. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, my parents' pristine SUV was already there. My father, Paul, was standing on the porch, wrestling with a rusted porch swing. He was a big man, broad-shouldered from years of running his contracting business, Foster Ridge, but age had begun to hollow him out. His hair was thinning, and there was a permanent furrow of worry etched between his eyebrows. "Hey, you made it," Ryan said, shutting off the engine. I looked at the house. I had spent summers here as a child, running through the overgrown garden, drinking iced tea on the porch with Eleanor while she told me stories about the stars. She used to say the oddest things. "The world tries to make you sleep. Claire Bear, you have to stay awake. We got out of the car." Mia ran to Paul, shouting, "Grandpa!" He caught her, swinging her up into his arms, his face softening. There was no denying he loved her. It was a fierce, protective love, the same kind he had for me, but it always felt tinged with fear, as if he expected us to vanish if he blinked. Linda appeared in the doorway, wearing rubber gloves and a heavy apron. She looked frantic. Come on," she said, ushering us inside. "We are losing daylight." The house smelled of lavender and old paper, the scent of Eleanor. It hit me so hard I had to stop in the entryway and take a breath. The furniture was already draped in sheets, making the living room look like a gathering of ghosts. "What is the plan?" Ryan asked, rubbing his hands together. Paul set Mia down. "You two take the attic. It is mostly old clothes and holiday decorations. Your mother and I will finish up in the study and the master bedroom." I started toward the stairs, but I paused at the door to the study. I saw stacks of file boxes lined up on the desk. One was marked Eleanor, personal in thick black marker. "Do you need help with those?" I asked. "I would love to see some of Grandma's old letters." Linda moved with startling speed, stepping between me and the door. "No," she said sharply. "Those are just financial records, tax returns, bills, boring stuff. You would be bored to tears." "Claire." Her smile was tight, not reaching her eyes. "Okay," I said, backing away. "Just asking." "Go on up," Paul said, his voice overly loud. "Let's get this done so we can get some lunch." The attic stairs were narrow and steep, hidden behind a door in the upstairs hallway. Ryan went first, carrying a flashlight. Though the dormer windows let in enough dusty gray light to see, the attic was a time capsule. Trunks, broken lamps, stacks of National Geographic magazines from the 70s, and dress forms draped in moth-eaten velvet. The air was hot and dry, swirling with dust motes that danced in the beams of light cutting through the gloom. "Wow," Ryan said, looking around. Eleanor was a bit of a hoarder, wasn't she? She just kept things, I said, running my hand over a velvet armchair. She said objects have memories attached to them, if you throw them away. The memory fades. We started sorting. Trash bags for the obvious junk, boxes for donation. Mia played in a corner, dressing a porcelain doll she had found in a pile of linens. It was peaceful for a while, just the sound of shifting boxes and the wind rattling the window panes. But I could not shake the feeling from downstairs, the way Linda had blocked the door, the way Paul had looked at me, as if he were waiting for a bomb to go off. They had always been private, but this felt different. It felt like containment. Ryan was over by the far wall, digging under a stack of heavy quilts. "Hey, Claire, look at this," he said. He dragged out a large cedar chest. The wood was beautiful, aromatic and dark red. He flipped the latch and opened it. Inside were smaller boxes, wrapped in tissue paper. I walked over, wiping dust from my hands on my jeans. "What is it?" Ryan started unwrapping them. Jewelry boxes mostly, costume jewelry. But at the bottom, there was something else. He lifted it out with both hands. It was a heavy wooden box, perhaps the size of a shoebox but thicker, made of dark polished oak. It had brass corners and a heavy tarnished brass lock on the front. There was no key. On the lid, a piece of yellowed masking tape was stuck to the wood. The handwriting was faint, shaky, but unmistakable. Eleanor's script. "Claire." "It is for you," Ryan said, holding it out. I took the box. It was surprisingly heavy. I shook it gently. Something shifted inside, dense and sliding. Paper? Photographs? I have never seen this before. I whispered. Ryan grinned. "Maybe it is gold bars, or a treasure map." He reached out and jiggled the brass lock. It rattled loudly in the quiet attic. "So, treasure hunters," he said playfully. "How do we get into this thing?" The sound of the lock rattling seemed to echo. Suddenly, a small hand gripped Ryan's forearm. Hard. We both looked down. Mia was standing there. The porcelain doll lay forgotten on the floor. Her face, usually so expressive and bright, was completely blank. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the box in my hands. "Don't open the locked one." "Daddy?" she whispered. Ryan laughed nervously. "What did you say? Peanut?" Mia did not blink. She did not look at him. She looked only at the brass lock. "Grandma said you never, ever open the locked one," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of her usual childish lilt. It sounded like a recording. A chill, cold and sharp, went down my spine. "Mia," I said, kneeling down. "Grandma Eleanor died 6 months ago. When did she tell you that?" Mia looked at me then. "Grandma said it. Don't open the locked one." The attic went completely silent. The wind outside seemed to stop. The dust motes hung suspended in the air. Suddenly, footsteps thundered up the narrow stairs. Linda appeared at the top, breathless, her face flushed. Paul was right behind her. "What is going on?" Linda demanded. "We heard something fall. We were just looking through this chest," Ryan said. Standing up, he looked confused by their intensity. "We found this box for Claire." Linda's eyes snapped to the box in my hands. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like a physical blow. "Give me that," she said. She crossed the attic in 3 strides and snatched the box from my hands. Her fingers were trembling violently. "Mom," I said, standing up, "that has my name on it. It is just old junk," Linda said, her voice pitching high and shrill. "Eleanor had boxes of nonsense everywhere. We need to clear this out. It goes into storage." She clutched the box to her chest, her knuckles white. Paul was standing by the stairwell. He looked sick. His gaze was fixed on the box, and there was naked terror in his eyes. "Paul?" I asked. "What is wrong?" He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Some things," he muttered, his voice raspy, "some things do not need to be dragged back up after 32 years. The number hung in the air. 32. I looked at my father. I looked at the box in my mother's arms. I am 32, I said slowly. Paul blinked, as if realizing what he had said. He looked at Linda, then back to me. Linda let out a harsh, unnatural laugh. Oh, don't be silly. Claire, it is just a figure of speech. Your father is tired. The dust is getting to him. She turned away, refusing to meet my eyes. We are taking this down, she said. We need to focus on the trash. Ryan, bring those bags. Mia was still standing there, watching them. She tugged on my shirt. Don't open the locked one, she said again. It was not a warning anymore. It sounded like a rule she had been forced to memorize. The drive home that evening was excruciating. The rain finally came, lashing against the windshield of our car in rhythmic sheets. Ryan drove, his knuckles tight on the wheel. He could feel the tension radiating off me. In the trunk, tucked under the spare blanket, was the box. I had fought for it, not loudly. We Fosters did not fight loudly, but firmly. When we were loading the cars, Linda had tried to put the box in her SUV. I will keep it safe at our house, she had said. No, I had told her. It has my name on it. Mom, I am taking it. She had looked at Paul. Paul had looked at the ground. Finally, Linda had relented, but her parting words had been sharp. Do not fuss with it, Claire. We have enough on our plates with the sale. Just leave it alone until after the closing is finished. Promise me. I had not promised. I had just closed the trunk. Now, staring out at the blurred headlights of oncoming traffic. My mind was racing. 32 years. I was born 32 years ago. Why would a box marked for me, hidden in a cedar chest, trigger that kind of panic? And Mia. My God. Mia. Eleanor must have told her that months ago. Maybe during one of the times she babysat. Why would Eleanor tell a 4-year-old child about a locked box? Claire, Ryan said softly, breaking the silence. Yeah? Your parents. That was weird, right? I am not just imagining that. You are not imagining it. I said. I felt a headache throbbing behind my eyes, stronger than the office hum. What did your dad mean? About 32 years? I do not know. I lied. Or maybe I did not lie. I knew what the number meant, but I did not know why it mattered. Maybe it is just financial stuff, Ryan suggested, though he did not sound convinced. You know how they are about money. Maybe Eleanor set up a bond for you that they cashed out, or something, and they are embarrassed. Maybe, I said, but that did not explain the fear. Embarrassment looks like flushed cheeks and averted eyes. Fear looks like pale skin and trembling hands. My parents had been afraid. We pulled into our driveway. The house looked welcoming, the porch light casting a warm glow on the wet pavement. But as I got out and walked to the trunk, I felt a hesitation I had never felt before entering my own home. I opened the trunk. The box sat there, dark and sullen. I reached in and picked it up. It felt heavier than it had in the attic. That night, sleep was a foreign country I could not visit. The house was quiet. Mia was sound asleep, the fever gone as quickly as it had come. Ryan was beside me, his breathing deep and even, but I was wide awake. The box was in the corner of our bedroom, sitting on the floor near the closet. I had thrown a throw blanket over it, as if hiding it would stop it from existing. But I could feel it there. It had a gravity to it. Pulling at my attention, I turned over, staring at the ceiling. Shadows from the street lamp outside played across the plaster. Memories of Eleanor drifted through my mind. She was a woman of sharp angles and soft hugs. She used to look at me with a sadness I never understood. The truth has its own timing. Claire Bear. She had said to me once. We were sitting on her porch, shucking corn. I must have been 12. I had asked her why she and Mom argued so much. What does that mean? I had asked. It means you cannot force a flower to bloom, she had said, but you also cannot stop it when it is ready. It will break the concrete if it has to. I sat up in bed. The digital clock read 3:14 a.m. I threw off the covers and walked to the corner of the room. I pulled the blanket off the box. Moonlight hit the tarnished brass lock. Claire. The letter seemed to vibrate. I reached out and touched the cold wood. It was solid, unyielding. I heard the rustle of sheets behind me. Claire? Ryan's voice was thick with sleep. I froze. I am sorry. I did not mean to wake you. Ryan sat up. He rubbed his face with his hands. You are staring at it, he said. I cannot help it. I whispered, Ryan. They were terrified. You saw them. Yeah, he said. He got out of bed and came over to stand beside me. He looked down at the box. He put his hand on my shoulder. His grip was warm, grounding. It felt like... He paused, searching for the right words. It felt like they are more afraid of you seeing what is inside than anything else. Like the box itself isn't the danger. The information is. I nodded slowly. What could be in there? Ryan? I asked. What could be so bad that they would panic like that after 32 years? I do not know, Ryan said. He crouched down next to me. But whatever it is, he said, it has been waiting for you for a long time. He reached out and touched the lock. Just for a second. We do not have the key. He noted. No, I said. Ryan stood up and offered me his hand. Come back to bed. Claire. It will still be there in the morning. I took his hand and let him lead me back to the warmth of the bed. But as I lay there, closing my eyes, I knew he was wrong. It would be there in the morning. Yes, but everything else. The normalcy, the trust, the quiet rhythm of my life was already beginning to fade. The box was not just a container. It was a question mark at the end of a sentence I thought had already been written. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was going to find the answer, no matter what my father said, no matter what my mother promised. The lock was not meant to keep me out. It was meant to keep the truth in. And concrete can only hold back the bloom for so long. November dragged its feet across the Midwest, stripping the last of the red leaves from the maples and replacing the crisp autumn air with a damp, bone-chilling gray. Life in Maplebridge, at least on the surface, had returned to its calibrated equilibrium. The morning rush to get Mia to daycare, the endless stream of client emails at Horizon Path Marketing, and the nightly negotiation of who would cook and who would do the dishes. But inside our house on Elm Street, the gravity had shifted. The box sat in the corner of my walk-in closet. I had buried it beneath a stack of winter duvets and a pile of Ryan's old sweaters, constructing a soft fortress to hide the hard, wooden reality of it. I told myself I was ignoring it. I told myself I was too busy to indulge in the paranoia that had seized me in my grandmother's attic. Yet, every night, after Ryan had brushed his teeth and climbed into bed, I would find a reason to go into the closet. I would push aside the heavy wool of the sweaters just enough to catch a glint of the brass lock. It was a ritual, a silent confirmation that it was still there, still waiting. The stress of the unknown was compounding the stress of the known. At work, Dave was riding me hard about the fourth quarter projections for a local dental chain, a client who thought marketing was magic rather than math. At home, the furnace had started making an ominous clanking sound that signaled an expensive repair we could not afford. Ryan was feeling it too. I could see it in the way he stared at the bank app on his phone, his brow furrowed, lips moving silently as he calculated groceries versus utilities. We are going to be tight this month. Claire, he said one evening, looking up from the kitchen island. The car insurance is due, and if that furnace goes, we will figure it out, I said, stirring a pot of chili that had started to stick to the bottom. We always do. Maybe I can pick up some freelance copywriting. Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It feels like we are treading water. I wanted to tell him that money was the least of my worries, but that would have been a lie. Money was the vice that squeezed us, but the box was the ghost that haunted me. The two anxieties danced together, a waltz of dread that kept me awake until 2 a.m. Then came the dinner. It was 3 weeks after the incident in the attic. My mother called on a Tuesday, her voice bright and airy, completely devoid of the sharp tension that had defined our trip to Briar Glen. We want to come over for dinner on Friday, she said. Your father misses Mia. And I found a recipe for that apple crumble you like. I will bring everything. You just provide the oven. It was an olive branch. I knew it. And she knew I knew it. Since the day I brought the box home, we had spoken only about the weather and Mia's preschool schedule. The topic of Eleanor, the attic, and the number 32 had been strictly embargoed. They arrived at 6 o'clock sharp. Paul was wearing his good sweater, a navy blue cable knit that hid the stoop in his shoulders. Linda was carrying a grocery bag in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other, a Pinot Noir that was significantly more expensive than what they usually drank. "Hello, darling," Linda chirped, sweeping in to kiss my cheek. She smelled of hairspray and expensive perfume, a scent she wore like armor. "Hey, Mom," I said, accepting the hug. She held on a fraction of a second too long, a squeeze that felt less like affection and more like desperation. Paul bypassed me and went straight for Mia, who was building a tower of blocks on the living room rug. "Look what I have got for you, Munchkin," he said, pulling a wrapped box from behind his back. Mia tore into the paper with the savage efficiency of a 4-year-old. It was a high-end interactive learning tablet, the kind that cost $200 and that Ryan and I had explicitly agreed was too expensive for Christmas. Let alone a random Friday in November. "Dad, this is too much," I said, watching Mia's face light up. "Nonsense," Paul said, waving his hand. "Grandparents' prerogative. Besides, business has been steady. We wanted to treat her." The evening proceeded with a surreal, manufactured cheerfulness. We ate the chili I had made, followed by Linda's apple crumble. The wine flowed freely. Paul told jokes about his golf game, and Linda listened with rapt attention, laughing at punchlines she had heard 1,000 times. They were performing. They were playing the role of the happy, uncomplicated family, and they were daring me to break character. Ryan, bless him, played along. He talked about the logistics warehouse, about the chaotic supply chain issues, grateful for a conversation that wasn't about our checking account. It was only when we were clearing the table that I decided to push. Just a little. The wine had made me brave, or perhaps just reckless. I was scraping plates into the trash while Linda loaded the dishwasher. "Mom," I said, keeping my tone casual, "I was thinking about Grandma Eleanor the other day." Linda's hand froze on a wine glass. She didn't look at me. "Oh?" she said. "Yeah," I said. "I realized I never really saw the final paperwork for her estate. I know you and Dad handled everything as the executors, but did she leave anything specifically for me?" I turned to look at her. Linda was staring at the dishwasher rack, her posture rigid. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean, besides the trinkets and the furniture." I said, "Did she leave a letter or a small bequest? She always told me she wanted to help with Mia's college fund." Paul walked into the kitchen then, carrying his empty dessert plate. He must have heard the question, because the jovial grandfather act vanished instantly. His face darkened, the lines around his mouth deepening into a scowl. Eleanor was dramatic. "Claire," Paul snapped. He set his plate down on the counter with a clatter that made me jump. "She talked a big game," he continued, his voice rising. "She liked to make promises she couldn't keep. The estate was a mess. Debts, maintenance costs on that old house. By the time we settled the accounts, there was barely enough to cover the funeral, but," I started. "She was not generous. Claire," Paul cut me off. "She was chaotic. We protected you from that. You should be grateful we didn't burden you with the reality of her finances." The harshness of his tone sucked the air out of the room. Ryan appeared in the doorway, sensing the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. "Is everything okay in here?" he asked. "Fine," Linda said quickly. She slammed the dishwasher door shut and turned around, pasting a smile back onto her face. It was a terrifying expression, straining against the panic in her eyes. "Just reminiscing," she said. "But look at the time. Paul, we should get going. You know you have that early meeting with the supplier tomorrow." They left in a flurry of coats and quick hugs. The exit was so hasty it felt like an escape. After the door clicked shut, the silence in the house was heavy. "Well," Ryan said, locking the deadbolt. That was weird. They are lying. I said. I was standing in the hallway, looking at the door. I don't know what about. But they are lying. I turned to head toward the kitchen to finish cleaning up. But something caught my eye. Near the front door, we had a small row of brass hooks where we kept our keys. Ryan's truck keys, my sedan key, the spare key for the shed. There was an empty space. I stopped. I stared at the hook. Ryan, I said, "Did you take the spare house key?" "What?" "No," Ryan called from the living room. "It should be on the hook." I walked over and touched the cold brass. The key was gone. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I turned and ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time. "Claire!" Ryan shouted. I burst into our bedroom and tore open the closet door. I fell to my knees, shoving aside the sweaters and the duvet. The box was there, but the blanket was wrong. I had folded the corner of the duvet under the box in a specific way, a triangle fold, like a hotel napkin. I did it unconsciously, a habit from my college days working in housekeeping. The duvet was just draped over it now, loose, haphazard. Someone had moved it. I sat back on my heels, my breath coming in shallow gasps. While I was in the kitchen stirring the chili, while Ryan was in the living room with Mia, one of them had come up here. One of them had come into my bedroom, searched my closet, and found the box. They had tried to open it, and failing that, they had taken the spare key from downstairs, perhaps thinking it might work, or perhaps just to ensure they could come back. They had brought wine. They had brought a $200 toy. And while we were distracted by their generosity, they had tried to break into my past. 3 days later, the letter arrived. It was a Monday. I had come home early to meet the furnace repairman, who had charged us $300 to tell us the system was on its last legs, but would survive the winter if we prayed hard enough. I grabbed the mail from the box at the end of the driveway and flipped through it as I walked back to the house. Bill, coupon, credit card offer, bill, and then a thin white envelope with a window. The return address was County Treasurer, Larkridge Cove. I stopped walking. I had never heard of Larkridge Cove. I looked at the addressee, Claire Eleanor Foster, my middle name. I never used it on official documents, my driver's license, my bank accounts, my tax returns. They all said Claire Marie Foster. Marie was the middle name on my birth certificate. Eleanor was just what Grandma called me. I tore the envelope open right there in the driveway, the cold wind whipping my hair across my face. It was a property tax notice. Notice of delinquent taxes. Parcel ID 04-192-88. Location 4402 Lakeview Drive, Larkridge Cove. Legal owner Claire Eleanor Foster / Eleanor Foster Revocable Trust. 1994. Amount due $1,420.50. I stared at the paper. The numbers swam before my eyes. 1994, the year I was born. I walked into the house, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. I sat down at the kitchen table, leaving my coat on. I placed the letter on the placemat and dialed the number listed at the top of the page. County Treasurer's Office. "This is Barbara," a raspy voice answered. "Hi," I said. My voice was trembling. "I received a tax notice. Parcel ID 04-192-88. I think there has been a mistake. I don't own any property in Larkridge Cove." "One moment, Hunt," Barbara said. I heard the clacking of a keyboard. "Okay, here we go," she said. 4402 Lakeview Drive. Small cabin, half-acre lot. Listed owner is Claire Eleanor Foster, trustee of the Eleanor Foster Revocable Trust. Are you Claire?" "Yes," I said, "but I never bought this. I don't know what this is. Well, it looks like it was transferred into the trust in 1994. Barbara said, "Taxes have been paid regularly by a Foster Ridge Contracting until last year. Then they stopped. My father's company. My stomach dropped. Foster Ridge." "Contracting paid the taxes?" I asked. "Up until 18 months ago." Barbara confirmed. "But wait," I said, looking at the notice again. "It says I am the owner. Can I sell it?" There was a pause on the line. Well, that is the tricky part. Hun, Barbara said. According to the notes here, there is a flag on the deed, a notice of interest, filed about 10 years ago. Looks like a transfer agreement was initiated to a company called Silverline Lakeside Holdings. Silverline Lakeside Holdings. The name sounded corporate, sterile, and vaguely threatening. What does that mean? I asked. It means the title is clouded. Barbara explained. It looks like the property was sold, or at least promised, to this Silverline outfit. But the final deed was never recorded in their name. It is stuck in limbo. But since your name is on the trust, the tax bill comes to you. I thanked her and hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. My father had been paying taxes on a cabin I owned but didn't know about. He had paid them through his company, and then, 10 years ago, he, or someone, had tried to sell it to a developer. I picked up the phone again. I didn't give myself time to think. I dialed my father's cell. Yeah? Paul answered on the second ring. He sounded out of breath, like he was on a job site. Dad, I said, I got a tax bill today. For a cabin in Larkridge Cove, the silence on the other end was absolute. For 5 seconds. The only sound was the static of the connection. That, Paul said finally. His voice was flat, guarded. That is a clerical glitch. Claire. It doesn't look like a glitch, I said. It lists me as the owner, since 1994, and it says Foster Ridge was paying the taxes. It was a mistake, Paul said, his voice gaining volume. Eleanor bought that shack years ago. It's a dump, practically worthless. We tried to offload it years ago to get it off the books. I thought it was done. You tried to offload it to Silverline Lakeside Holdings? I asked. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Who told you that name? Paul demanded. It was not a question. It was an accusation. The county clerk. I said, Dad, why is my name on it? Why didn't you tell me I owned property? Claire, listen to me, Paul hissed. He sounded angry now. A cornered, defensive anger. Throw that letter away. Do you hear me? Shred it. It is a meaningless piece of land with a clouded title. It is nothing but liability. I will handle the county. Do not call them again. But, I said drop it, Paul shouted. The volume made me pull the phone away from my ear. You don't know what you are digging into. Just leave it alone. The line went dead. I looked at the phone in my hand. My father had never hung up on me in his life. That evening, the house felt like a cage. Ryan was working a late shift at the warehouse, trying to pick up overtime to pay for the furnace. Mia was asleep. I went to the closet. I pulled the box out. I didn't care about hiding it anymore. I carried it downstairs to the kitchen. Placing it directly under the bright LED lights of the island, it sat there, mocking me. Claire. I ran my hands over the wood. It was smooth, worn by time. I turned it over, examining the bottom. I had looked at it before, but never closely. I had been too focused on the lock. Now, under the harsh kitchen light, I saw it. Faint indentations in the wood. Scratches that looked like they had been made with a ballpoint pen pressing too hard, or perhaps etched with a needle. I tilted the box, catching the light, to be opened by Claire alone. Age 32. E.F. I gasped. The air rushed out of my lungs. Eleanor. E.F. Age 32. It wasn't a random number. It wasn't just the number of years since I was born. It was an instruction. Eleanor had intended for me to open this box now. Specifically now. And my parents knew. Some things don't need to be dragged back up after 32 years. Paul had said in the attic, he hadn't been talking about the past. He had been talking about the deadline. They knew the clock had run out. I needed to know more. I needed to hear her voice. I remembered the other box we had brought back from the attic. The junk box Linda had allowed us to keep. It was sitting in the guest room, filled with old photo albums and knickknacks. I ran to the guest room and dumped the box out on the bed. Photos of me as a baby, a porcelain dog, a stack of old postcards, and at the bottom, a cassette tape. It was an old TDK 90-minute tape. The label was peeling, but the writing was legible. For Claire. When she's ready. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I didn't have a tape player. Who had a tape player in 2026? Then I remembered. Ryan's old boombox. He kept it in the garage, using it to listen to radio while he worked on the car. I ran to the garage, the cold concrete stinging my bare feet. I found the boombox on a shelf, covered in sawdust. I plugged it in. The red power light flickered, then held. I pressed the eject button. The plastic door creaked open. I slid the tape in and pressed play. A hiss of static filled the garage. I turned the volume up. Then, her voice. It was unmistakable, raspy, warm, with that slight Midwestern twang. Eleanor. Testing. Is this thing on? Okay. There was a pause, the sound of a chair shifting. Claire Bear. If you are listening to this, then you are asking questions. Good. You always were a curious child. I closed my eyes, tears hot on my cheeks. It was like she was in the room. I wanted to tell you myself. Eleanor's voice continued. But Paul, your father is a stubborn man. He thinks he can build a wall around the truth and live inside it. But walls crumble. Claire, they always do. She sighed on the recording, a heavy, weary sound. I am recording this because I don't know if I will be around when the time comes. There is a story. Claire, a story about the day you came into our family. It didn't happen the way they told you. It started with click. The sound was loud, abrupt. Then, silence. I stared at the boombox. I waited. Nothing but the low hum of the speakers. I pressed stop. I pressed rewind. I played it again. It started with click. I popped the tape out. I looked at the magnetic ribbon. It hadn't snapped. It had been recorded over, or erased. The rest of the tape was blank. Someone had gotten to it. I stood there in the freezing garage, clutching the plastic square of the cassette tape. The realization washed over me, cold and absolute. This wasn't just about a will. This wasn't just about money or a cabin. The day you came into our family, it didn't happen the way they told you. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. I checked the deadbolt twice. I sat on the couch with my laptop, the blue light illuminating the dark living room. I typed into the search bar. Silverline Lakeside Holdings lawsuits, revocable trust fraud limitations, adoption records closed 1994. I didn't know why I typed the last one. It was an instinct, a dark whisper from the back of my mind that I couldn't silence. I scrolled through forums, legal advice, ancestry boards, posts from people who had found out their lives were lies. I read stories about hidden siblings, secret debts, forged deeds. The property tax notice lay on the coffee table next to the locked box. The name Claire Eleanor Foster stared up at me. I looked at my own hands. They looked the same as they had this morning, but I felt like a stranger inhabiting my own body. Who was I? Was I the daughter of Paul and Linda Foster? The beloved only child of a respectable contracting family? Or was I the owner of a lakeside cabin, the beneficiary of a secret trust, and the keeper of a locked box that my parents were terrified to open? Ryan came home at midnight. He found me asleep on the couch, the laptop open on my chest, the box sitting on the floor beside me like a loyal, dangerous pet. He woke me up gently. "Claire?" he whispered. I opened my eyes. I looked at my husband, his face etched with exhaustion, but full of love. "Ryan," I said, my voice croaking. "Yeah? We are going to open it," I said. He looked at the box. He didn't argue. He didn't ask about the parents or the money. "Okay," he said softly. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. "But not tonight," he said. "Tonight, you need to sleep." I nodded, but as I walked upstairs, leaving the box on the table, I knew I wouldn't sleep. The lock was waiting, and for the first time in 32 years, I was ready to break it. The doorbell rang at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night, sharp and demanding, cutting through the quiet hum of the dishwasher like a siren. It was not the polite ding-dong of a neighbor returning a borrowed tool. It was a sustained, insistent press that refused to be ignored. Ryan looked up from the sofa where he was folding laundry. a pair of Mia's tiny socks in his hands. "Who comes over this late on a school night?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I stood up from the kitchen table, where I had been staring at the locked box for the better part of an hour. I knew who it was. My stomach twisted into a knot, a physical manifestation of the dread that had been building since I found the empty key hook. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. Paul and Linda. My father was pacing on the porch, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his beige windbreaker. My mother stood still, clutching her purse with both hands, her face illuminated by the harsh yellow glow of the porch light. She looked pale, her makeup applied with a heavy hand that failed to conceal the dark circles under her eyes. I opened the door. "We need the box." "Claire." Paul said before I could even say hello. He didn't step inside. He just stood on the threshold, blocking the cold wind with his broad frame. "Hello to you too." "Dad," I said, leaning against the doorframe. I crossed my arms over my chest, a defensive posture I hadn't used since I was 16. "We are not doing this tonight," Linda said, stepping forward. Her voice was brittle, like dry leaves. "We are not playing games. Give us the box." "Claire, it is property of the estate. It was never meant to leave the house in Briar Glen. It has my name on it," I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. "Eleanor wrote my name on the tape. Claire. Not estate. Not Paul." She was senile at the end. Paul snapped. He made a move to step inside, but I didn't budge. He stopped, inches from my face. "You know how she got? Confused. Paranoid. That box contains sensitive family documents, things that will only hurt people if they are taken out of context." "Hurt people?" I asked. "Or hurt you?" Paul's face flushed a deep, angry red. "Don't be insolent," he said. "I am your father. I have protected you your entire life. I put a roof over your head. I paid for your college. You think you can just stand there and judge me because of some old papers?" "I am not judging you." I said, "I am asking you why you are so terrified of a wooden box. I am asking why you tried to sneak into my bedroom and steal it. I am asking why you have been paying taxes on a cabin in Larkridge Cove that apparently belongs to me." The mention of Larkridge Cove hit them like a physical blow. Linda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Paul went rigid, his eyes widening. "You don't know what you are talking about," Paul whispered. His anger had evaporated, replaced by a desperate intensity. "Then tell me." I said, "Come inside. Sit down. Tell me the truth, and I will give you the box." Paul shook his head frantically. "No," he said. "It is too complicated. It is—" "Look, Claire, just give it to us. Please, before it causes a mess we can't fix. A mess you can't fix." I repeated. "We are trying to protect you," Linda cried out. Tears were streaming down her face now, carving tracks through her foundation. "You have a happy life. Claire, you have Ryan. You have Mia. Why do you want to blow it up? Why can't you just trust us?" "Because you are lying to me," I shouted. The sudden volume of my voice made them both recoil. I had never shouted at my parents, not once. We were the Fosters. We were quiet. We were polite. We swept things under rugs. I took a breath, lowering my voice but keeping the steel in it. "Go home," I said. "Claire," Paul started. "Go home," I said again. "I am not giving you the box. And if you come back here unannounced again, I will change the locks." Paul stared at me for a long moment. He looked as if he didn't recognize me. Then, he grabbed Linda's arm. "Come on, Linda," he muttered. "She is not listening." They turned and walked back to their car, the gravel crunching under their feet. They looked old, defeated, and guilty. I closed the door and locked it. Then I threw the deadbolt. Then I engaged the safety chain. I turned around to find Ryan standing in the hallway. He had put the laundry basket down. "They are scared to death," Ryan said quietly. "Yes," I said. "They are." He walked over to me and wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me into his chest. I buried my face in his t-shirt, smelling the familiar scent of detergent and sawdust. I was shaking. "Do you want to give it to them?" Ryan asked. "To keep the peace?" I pulled back and looked at him. "Do you?" I asked. Ryan sighed, looking toward the kitchen where the box sat on the table. "I think peace is overrated when it is based on a lie," he said. "I would rather know the ugly truth than live in a house built on question marks. Besides," he paused, a shadow crossing his face, "if they are this scared, it means whatever is in there matters. It matters to you. And if it matters to you, we open it." We waited until midnight. The house settled into its nighttime rhythm, the furnace clanking softly in the basement, the wind rattling the storm windows. I checked on Mia 3 times, making sure she was deeply asleep. She was curled up with her stuffed rabbit, her breathing a soft, rhythmic puff against the pillow. I went downstairs. Ryan had cleared the dining room table. He had laid out a towel to protect the finish, and on top of it sat the box. Next to it, he had arranged a small arsenal of tools: a thin flathead screwdriver, a pair of needle-nose pliers, a paperclip, and a bobby pin he had taken from my bathroom counter. "It looks like a surgical operation," I whispered, pulling out a chair. "It is, in a way," Ryan said. He sat down opposite me, rolling up the sleeves of his flannel shirt. He looked focused, serious. He picked up the bobby pin and the screwdriver. "You ready?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but do it anyway." Ryan inserted the tension wrench, the screwdriver, into the bottom of the keyhole. He slid the straightened bobby pin into the top. I watched his hands. They were steady hands, capable hands, hands that built shelves and fixed cars and held our daughter when she cried. He applied a slight turning pressure. I held my breath. The silence in the room was deafening. Every scrape of the metal pick against the pins inside the lock sounded like a gunshot. "Click, 1 pin set," Ryan murmured. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I felt a wave of nausea. Part of me wanted to reach out and stop him. "Stop. Put it back. Let's just pretend none of this happened. Let's go back to being Claire and Ryan, the boring couple with the mortgage and the daycare bills." But I couldn't. The genie was already halfway out of the bottle. "Click, 2," Ryan whispered. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. We both froze. Ryan pulled his hands back as if the box were hot. We turned toward the doorway. Mia was standing there. She was wearing her pink pajamas with the feet. Her hair was tousled from sleep, sticking up in static charged tufts. She was rubbing one eye with a fist, clutching her rabbit with the other hand. She looked at the box. She looked at Ryan's tools. "Daddy?" she said, her voice thick with sleep. "Hey, Peanut," Ryan said, his voice straining for normalcy. "Go back to bed. Honey, we are just fixing something." Mia took a step into the room. She pointed a small finger at the box. "Grandma said, 'Don't open the locked one,'" she said. I felt a chill ripple through the room, colder than the draft from the window. She looked so small, so serious. "Grandma said if you open it, everyone will be mad." Mia continued. "She said the bad feelings will come out." I stood up and walked over to her. I knelt down so I was eye level with my daughter. I took her small, warm hands in mine. "Mia, look at Mommy," I said softly. She looked at me, her blue eyes wide and worried. "Grandma Eleanor loved us very much," I said. "But Grandma Eleanor was worried about Grandpa and Grandma Linda. She wasn't worried about us." Mia tilted her head. "She wasn't?" "No," I said firmly. "And you know what? Secrets are heavy. Sometimes, when you open them up, the bad feelings don't come out. The truth comes out. And the truth is good. Even when it hurts a little, it is good." Mia thought about this for a moment. "Is Grandpa going to be mad?" she asked. "Maybe," I said, "but that is not your fault. And it is not Daddy's fault. And it is not my fault. Okay?" "Okay," Mia whispered. I kissed her forehead. "Now, back to bed. I will be up to tuck you in again in a minute." She turned and padded back down the hallway. I watched her go until she disappeared into her room. I stood up and looked at Ryan. She wasn't warning me. I said, Realizing it for the first time, Eleanor told Mia that warning so she would repeat it to them. To Paul and Linda. She knew they would try to get the box. She was using Mia as a guard dog. Ryan nodded slowly. Eleanor was playing 4D chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He turned back to the box. "One more pin," he said. He inserted the tools again. A twist, a scrape, snap. The brass shackle popped open. The sound was final, absolute. Ryan pulled the tools out and set them on the towel. He looked at me. "Your turn," he said. I sat down. I reached out and lifted the heavy wooden lid. The hinges groaned, a sound of wood waking up after a long sleep. Inside, there was no treasure, no gold, no jewels, just paper. Thick, yellowed envelopes, tied with faded blue ribbon. They were stacked neatly, filling the box to the brim. I reached in and lifted the first one. It was heavy. The paper was high quality, the kind lawyers use. On the front, in Eleanor's unmistakable, spiky handwriting, Claire Birth. I set it down. I reached for the second one, Larkridge Cabin, and the third, Foster Ridge Contracting, Settlement. And finally, a small, white envelope, sealed with red wax that had cracked with age. For Claire's eyes only, not to be intercepted. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold them. "Which one?" Ryan asked softly. "Start at the beginning," I whispered. I picked up the envelope marked Claire. Birth. I untied the ribbon. It fell away, limp and lifeless. I slid a finger under the flap and tore it open. I pulled out the documents. The first one was a birth certificate, but it didn't look like the one I had in my safe deposit box. The one I had seen 1,000 times. Claire Marie Foster, born to Paul Foster and Linda Foster. This one was older, typewritten. Certificate of live birth, name of child, Claire Marie Harlow. Date of birth, October 14th, 1994. Place of birth, Briar Glen. Community hospital, mother's maiden name, Emily Harlow. Father's name, unknown. I stared at the name, Emily Harlow. It wasn't a name I knew. It wasn't a distant cousin. It was a stranger. "I am adopted," I said. The words felt foreign in my mouth. Ryan leaned in, reading over my shoulder. He placed a hand on my back, steadying me. "Keep reading," he said. Behind the certificate was a legal document, private adoption agreement. It was notarized. It laid out the terms. Emily Harlow, age 21, was surrendering her parental rights to Paul and Linda Foster, and stapled to the back was a handwritten letter. To Paul and Linda. "I am trusting you with her. I am trusting you because Eleanor says you are good people, and because I cannot give her the life she deserves right now. But please, promise me one thing. Do not let her live a lie. Tell her the truth. Tell her about me, not when she is a baby, but when she is old enough to understand. By her 18th birthday, please, she has a right to know where she came from. Emily, they never told me," I whispered. 18. I turned 18 14 years ago. They looked me in the eye on my 18th birthday, gave me a car, and said nothing. I felt a surge of heat in my chest. Not sadness, rage, pure, white-hot rage. I reached for the second envelope. Larkridge Cabin. I ripped it open. Inside was a last will and testament. Eleanor's will, but it was dated 1995, a year after I was born. An amended will. I, Eleanor Foster, being of sound mind, give, devise, and bequeath the property located at 4402 Lakeview Drive, Larkridge Cove, to my granddaughter, Claire Marie Foster, née Harlow. In recognition of what was taken from her birth mother, I scanned down the page. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning was clear. Condition of bequest. This property is to be held in trust. It may not be sold, transferred, or encumbered until Claire reaches the age of 32. If sold prior to this date, all proceeds must be placed in a dedicated trust account held jointly for Claire and Emily Harlow. 32. The deadline. Paul and Linda hadn't just hidden my adoption. They had hidden my inheritance, and based on the tax bill I had received, They had tried to sell it. They tried to sell it before I turned 32. Ryan said, reading along. That is why they were panicking in the attic. You turned 32 last month. The condition expired. Or, wait, he picked up the third envelope. Foster Ridge Contracting, Settlement. Open this one, he said. His voice was hard. I opened it. This envelope was filled with court documents. Civil lawsuit, State of Illinois versus Foster Ridge Contracting, dates from 1996, 1997, allegation, systemic fraud, overbilling, use of substandard materials. My father's company, the company he always said was steady, the company that paid for my ballet lessons and my braces, it was a fraud. There was a note paperclipped to the front of the stack. Eleanor's handwriting again. I refinanced the cabin to bail him out. I used the money I had set aside for your college fund. Claire, I used the money that should have gone to Emily to help her start over. Paul promised he would pay it back. He promised he would put the money into the trust for the cabin. He never did. He lied to the court. And he lied to me. If they sell this cabin outright, they will owe you more than money. They will owe you for a stolen life. I put the papers down. I felt sick. My entire childhood, the comfortable suburban house, the vacations, the stability, it was all funded by fraud. It was all paid for by stealing from me. And from this woman, Emily. There was one envelope left, the small one, for Claire's eyes only. I picked it up. My fingers felt numb. I slid my thumb under the wax seal and popped it open. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. The ink was blue, the handwriting shaky. This must have been written recently, before she died. My dearest Claire Bear, I am sorry. That is the first thing I need to say. I am so sorry. I was weak. When Paul and Linda decided not to tell you about Emily, I fought them. I screamed. I threatened to cut them off. But they are your parents. They held the cards. They told me if I told you the truth, they would cut me out of your life. I couldn't bear the thought of not seeing you grow up. So I swallowed the poison and I kept the secret. But I made a fail-safe. The cabin? I tied it up so tight they couldn't touch it without triggering a paper trail that would lead back to you. I set the date for your 32nd birthday because I thought, surely, by then, they would have done the right thing. Surely by then, Paul would have fixed his mess. If you are opening this before turning 32, then a miracle has happened. But if you are opening this after, it means they broke their promise to you. It means they broke their promise to Emily, and it means they are still trying to hide. You are the one who gets to decide what happens next. You owe them nothing. They bought their peace with your inheritance. Find Emily. She is good. She loved you enough to let you go. Love, Grandma. I dropped the letter on the table. I put my head in my hands. The room was spinning. They threatened to cut her off. They blackmailed his own mother to keep her silent. Ryan didn't say anything for a long time. He was scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by the pale blue light of the screen. Ryan? I asked. He looked up. His face was pale. Claire, he said, look at this. He turned the phone toward me. It was a news article from a local business journal, dated 5 years ago. Silverline Lakeside Holdings faces class action lawsuit. Investors claim the development group, which purchased distressed properties in the Larkridge area, failed to deliver on promised returns. Several local families lost significant retirement savings. I don't understand. I said, what does this have to do with us? Silverline is the company your dad tried to sell the cabin to. Ryan said, the clerical glitch he mentioned. Yeah, so? Ryan swiped to another screen. A list of investors in Silverline. Look at the names. Claire. I scanned the list. It was alphabetical. Anderson, Baker, Cole, Robert and Martha Cole, Ryan's parents. I stared at the screen. Your parents invested in Silverline? I asked. Ryan nodded. He looked like he was about to be sick. They lost everything about 6 years ago. He said, remember? They had to sell their house and move into that condo. Dad said he lost his retirement in some lakeside mess. He never gave me the details because he was too ashamed. He looked at the documents on the table. Your dad, Ryan said, his voice trembling. Your dad's company, Foster Ridge, was funneling property to Silverline. Eleanor said she refinanced the cabin to pay off his fraud debts. But if the deed was clouded, if he tried to sell it to Silverline to cover his tracks. He looked at me. Claire, my parents' money, the money they lost. It might have gone to pay off your dad's debts. Or worse, your dad might have been the one who convinced them to invest. The room seemed to shrink. The walls were closing in. It wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about my adoption or my inheritance. My father's lies had reached out and poisoned Ryan's family too. My parents were living in their comfortable house, driving their nice cars, while Ryan's parents were scraping by in a 2-bedroom condo. Having lost their life savings to a scam that my father was neck-deep in, I looked at Ryan. I saw the hurt in his eyes, the betrayal. I am so sorry, I whispered. It's not you, Ryan said. He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was tight, desperate. But we can't close this box. Claire, not now. This is everything. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the dark street. Your parents did this, he said quietly. They did this to you. They did this to Emily. And they did this to my mom and dad. I picked up Eleanor's letter again. You are the one who gets to decide what happens next. I looked at the birth certificate. Emily Harlow. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but steady. I know what we have to do, I said. Ryan turned to face me. What? He asked. I need to find her. I said, I need to find Emily. And then, I paused, looking at the pile of damning evidence. Then I'm going to burn my parents' house to the ground. Not with fire, with the truth. Ryan looked at me. For a second, I thought he might argue. I thought he might ask for mercy for the in-laws he had known for a decade. But he didn't. He looked at the phone, at the names of his parents on that list. Then let's find her, he said. I looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. The world was asleep. But inside the dining room of 412 Elm Street, everything had just woken up. The box was open, and nothing would ever be closed again. The next 3 days were a blur of gray static. I moved through the house like a ghost haunting my own life. I called in sick to Horizon Path Marketing, telling Dave I had a family emergency, which was the most honest thing I had said in weeks. The kitchen table had become a war room. The documents from the box, the birth certificate, the amended will, the lawsuit settlements, were spread out in a chaotic collage of betrayal. I spent hours just staring at them, tracing the signatures of people I thought I knew. Paul Foster, Linda Foster, Eleanor Foster, and the stranger, Emily Harlow. I tried to act normal for Mia. I made her oatmeal. I packed her lunch. I read her the story about the hungry caterpillar, but she knew. Children have a radar for emotional barometric pressure, and the air in our house was heavy enough to crush a lung. Mommy, why are you staring at the wall? She asked me on Thursday morning while eating her toast. I am just thinking. Peanut, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was made of cracking plaster. About the box? She asked. Yes, I said. About the box. Ryan was moving around me with cautious precision, like I was a bomb that hadn't quite finished exploding. He made coffee. He fielded calls from his mother. He didn't push me to talk, but I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for the shock to wear off and the anger to begin. By Friday evening, the fog lifted. It didn't clear into sunshine. It cleared into a cold, hard clarity. I picked up my phone and dialed the landline at my parents' house. Hello? Linda answered. Her voice was thin, anxious. Come over, I said. Claire, bring Dad, I interrupted. Come over. Now, I hung up before she could argue. They arrived 20 minutes later. I had set the stage. The box was gone, hidden away again in the safe Ryan had bolted to the floor in the basement. But the envelopes, the evidence, were laid out in a neat row on the dining table. Paul and Linda walked in. They looked 10 years older than they had on Sunday. Linda was wearing a raincoat she hadn't bothered to take off. Paul looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw set in a line of defensive grimness. "Sit down." I said. I did not offer them coffee. I did not take their coats. I stood at the head of the table, my hand resting on the back of my chair to keep it from shaking. They sat. Linda looked at the envelopes and let out a small, strangled sound. Paul stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the table. I picked up the birth certificate. I held it up. "How long?" I asked. My voice was quiet, devoid of inflection. "How long have I been the last to know who I am?" Linda broke. It wasn't a slow crumble. It was a sudden collapse. She put her face in her hands and began to sob, a raw, ugly sound that echoed off the hardwood floors. "Oh God, Claire," she wept. "We wanted to tell you. We did." "You wanted to tell me?" I repeated. "When? When I was 10? When I was 18? When I was 32? We loved you from the first breath," Linda cried, looking up. Her face was streaked with tears. "You have to understand. We tried for years. 7 years of doctors, of negative tests, of heartbreak. When Eleanor told us about Emily, it felt like a miracle." "Emily," I said. "Emily Harlow. Who is she?" "She was a girl from Briar Glen," Linda said, wiping her nose with a tissue she pulled from her sleeve. "Young, scared. She was 21. She wasn't ready to be a mother. She wanted you to have a stable home. Eleanor arranged it. It was a closed adoption. That is what everyone did back then. It was cleaner. Cleaner." I said. "We thought telling you would only bring pain." Linda insisted. "We didn't want you to feel different. We didn't want you to feel unwanted. You were ours, Claire. In every way that mattered. You were ours." I looked at Paul. He hadn't spoken. He was staring at the wall, a muscle in his jaw jumping. "And the cabin?" I asked, turning my gaze to him. Was stealing my inheritance also a way to make me feel wanted? Paul slammed his hand on the table. The sudden violence of it made Linda jump. "Don't you use that word," he snarled. "Stealing?" I asked. "I did what I had to do," Paul shouted. He stood up, towering over the table. "You think this life just appeared out of thin air? You think the ballet lessons, the college tuition, the down payment on this house just fell from the sky?" I looked at the envelope marked Foster Ridge Contracting. "I think it came from fraud," I said. Paul's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "Foster Ridge was a good company," he said, pointing a finger at me. "We hit a rough patch. The economy turned. Clients stopped paying. I had lawsuits piling up. I was going to lose everything. Our house, your future, everything. So you used Eleanor." I said. "She was my mother," Paul yelled. "She had assets she didn't need. That cabin was rotting into the lake. It was practically worthless. It wasn't hers to give," I said. I picked up the will. "It says right here. She left it to me. In trust. That will was a guilt trip. Not a contract." Paul spat. "Eleanor held that cabin over our heads like a weapon. She wanted to control us. She wanted to dictate how we raised you. She didn't understand business. She didn't understand that I needed liquidity to save the family. So you sold it," I said, "to Silverline Lakeside Holdings. I made a deal," Paul corrected. "I transferred the interest to Silverline. They paid off the settlements. They kept Foster Ridge afloat for another 5 years. And the trust?" I asked. "The trust that was supposed to hold the money for me and Emily?" Paul laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "There was no money left for a trust. Claire, it was gone. It went to lawyers. It went to creditors. It went to keeping you in brand-name clothes so you wouldn't know your father was drowning." I looked at Linda. She was staring at her hands, her shoulders shaking. "You knew," I said to her. "You knew he sold it. You knew the conditions." Linda nodded slowly. "We told ourselves we would pay it back," she whispered. "We said, once the business turns around, we will put the money into the trust. We will make it right before she turns 32. But the business never turned around." "Did it?" I asked. "No," Linda whispered. "It got worse. And then the lie just got too big. We couldn't touch it without bringing the whole house down. I looked at them, my parents, the people who had taught me to tell the truth, the people who had punished me for stealing a candy bar when I was 6. You sold me. I said, you sold my history to pay for your mistakes. And then you spent 32 years hoping I would never find out. Claire, please, Linda begged, reaching across the table. We are still your family. We love you. Doesn't that count for anything? I pulled my hand away. I don't know. I said, I honestly don't know. Paul buttoned his jacket. He looked cold again, composed. You have the papers, he said. You know the truth. Are you happy now? I looked at him with a detachment that frightened me. Get out, I said. Paul turned and walked to the door. He didn't look back. Linda hesitated, looking at me with pleading eyes, but I turned my face away. She followed him out. I locked the door behind them and slid down to the floor, burying my face in my knees. The next morning, I had an appointment. Ryan had found her, Jenna Marks. She was a solo practitioner with an office above a bakery in downtown Maplebridge. Her website said she specialized in estate litigation and family law. I sat in her office, which smelled faintly of yeast and old books. I had brought copies of everything. I wasn't stupid enough to bring the originals. Jenna was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bob. She read through the documents in silence. She read the birth certificate. She read the will. She read the lawsuit settlements. She took her glasses off and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Okay, she said. This is significant. How bad is it? I asked. Legally? It is a minefield, Jenna said. She leaned back in her chair. You have a clear breach of fiduciary duty. Your parents, specifically your father, as the executor of the estate, had a legal obligation to follow the terms of the will. Selling the cabin without establishing the trust, and using the proceeds for his own debts, is textbook embezzlement. And Silverline? I asked. That is where it gets complicated, Jenna said. She tapped the property tax notice. If Silverline knew about the trust conditions and bought the property anyway, they could be liable for aiding and abetting the breach. But if your father presented himself as having full authority to sell, well, Silverline might claim they were good faith purchasers. However, the fact that the deed was never fully recorded suggests they knew the title was dirty. So, I can sue them? I asked. You can. Jenna said, you can petition to have the sale voided. You can sue your parents for the value of the property and the misappropriated funds. You can sue for emotional distress. She paused, looking at me carefully. But you need to understand what that means. Claire, if you file this suit, everything becomes public record. The adoption, the fraud, the debts. Your father could face criminal charges. We are talking about grand larceny, elder abuse, potentially. I stared at the diploma on the wall behind her head. He admitted it. I said, he told me he did it to save the family. Jenna nodded. They always say that, she said softly. But intent doesn't negate the crime. If you pull this thread, the whole sweater unravels. You will be exposing decades of financial misconduct. It won't just destroy their retirement. It will destroy their reputation, and it will be a long, ugly fight. I thanked her and paid the consultation fee. I drove home in silence. The power I held in my hands felt heavy, radioactive. I could burn them down. I could take everything they had left, but was that justice? Or was it just revenge? Ryan was waiting for me when I got home. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his laptop open. What did the lawyer say? He asked. I sat down, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. She said we have a case. I said, a strong one. But if we pursue it, my dad could go to prison. Ryan didn't look surprised. He looked grim. Good, he said. I looked at him. Ryan was the gentlest man I knew. I had never heard him wish ill on anyone. Ryan, I said. He is still my father, is he? Ryan asked. He slammed his laptop shut. Claire, look at what he did. He didn't just steal from you. He stole from everyone. I know. I said, no. You don't know. Ryan said. He stood up and began to pace the kitchen. I messaged Jenna this morning. Privately. You did what? I asked, sitting up straighter. I asked her if there was a way to join the suit. Ryan said, on behalf of my parents. My mouth fell open. Ryan, I said, why would you do that without talking to me? Because I needed to know, Ryan shouted. His face was flushed. My parents are living in a condo that smells like cabbage because they lost their retirement in Silverline. They trust people. They trusted your dad. And now I find out that your dad was feeding deals to the very company that scammed them? He stopped pacing and looked at me. His eyes were wet. My dad cries at night. Claire, he said softly. I hear him when I visit. He thinks he failed Mom. But he didn't fail. He was robbed. By your family. I felt a spike of defensiveness. Sharp and irrational. My family? I said. You are talking about them like they are a crime syndicate. Aren't they? Ryan asked. You went behind my back, I said, my voice rising. You involved our marriage in a legal strategy before I even decided what I wanted to do. I am trying to protect us, Ryan said. We are broke. Claire, the furnace is dying. We have no savings. And there is money sitting there. Money that belongs to you. Money that belongs to my parents. And you are hesitating because you don't want to hurt the feelings of the man who stole it? It is not about feelings, I yelled. It is about sending my father to jail. Maybe he belongs there, Ryan yelled back. We stared at each other. The air in the kitchen was vibrating with the force of the words. I felt exposed. I felt used. Is that what this is? I asked, my voice trembling. Am I just leverage to you now? Is my trauma just a way for you to get your parents' money back? Ryan flinched as if I had slapped him. That is not fair, he said quietly. Isn't it? I asked. You didn't ask how I felt about meeting the lawyer. You asked if we could sue. You see a payday. Ryan looked at me for a long moment. Then he shook his head. I see accountability. Claire, he said, and I see you protecting the people who lied to you while the people who loved you suffer. He turned and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the back door open and close. I stood there, alone in the silence. I regretted the words as soon as they left my mouth. I knew Ryan wasn't greedy. I knew he was hurting, but the accusation hung in the air, toxic and heavy. My parents' poison was spreading. It was seeping into the walls of my own house, turning husband against wife. I needed air. I needed to think. I went back to the box. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe an answer. Maybe an excuse. I pulled out Eleanor's letter again, for Claire's eyes only. I read it again. I was weak. I made a failsafe. Find Emily. I turned the letter over. There was something taped to the back. A small, folded piece of notepaper. I had missed it in the initial frenzy of discovery. I unfolded it. Claire. Emily did not want secrecy. She wanted privacy, but not silence. She wanted you to know that she didn't abandon you. She let you go because she had no choice. She kept in touch with a social worker for years, just to ask how you were doing, if you ever want to find her. Start there. She left a forwarding contact case file. Harbor Way Family Services, case 899-21. Ask for the file on baby girl Harlow. She is waiting. Claire. I feel it. Harbor Way Family Services. I pulled out my phone. I searched the name. It was an agency in a city about 2 hours away. Riverton Springs. I looked at the clock. It was 1 a.m. I looked at the letter. She is waiting. My parents had tried to erase her. They had turned her into a shameful secret. A girl from Briar Glen, who was not ready, but Eleanor had kept the breadcrumbs. I realized then that I couldn't make a decision about the lawsuit, or the cabin, or my parents. Until I met her. I was missing half the story. I was missing the person who had actually paid the price for my comfort. I went upstairs. I didn't go to our bedroom. I went to Mia's room. The nightlight cast a soft pink glow over the room. Mia was asleep. Her limbs sprawled out in the carefree abandonment of childhood. I sat in the rocking chair in the corner, pulling my knees to my chest. I watched my daughter sleep. I thought about Paul and Linda. I thought about the fear I had seen in their eyes. They had lied to protect themselves, yes, but they had also lied because they were terrified of losing me. They thought that if I knew the truth, that I was bought, that I was stolen, that I was another woman's child, I would stop loving them. And in their fear, they had become monsters. I looked at Mia. I loved her with a ferocity that terrified me. I would do anything for her. I would die for her. But would I lie for her? Would I steal for her? Would I erase a person for her? I shivered. The line was thinner than I wanted to admit. But I knew one thing. Silence was not protection. Silence was a cancer. It grew in the dark, eating away at the healthy tissue until there was nothing left but the rot. I stood up and walked to the side of the crib. I reached out and touched Mia's soft hair. I promise you. I whispered into the darkness. I will never lie to you. Not about the big things. Not about who you are. I didn't know if I would sue my parents. I didn't know if my marriage would survive the fallout. I didn't know what I would find in Riverton Springs. But I knew I was done with the fog. I was going to find Emily Harlow, and I was going to open the last door. The reply from Harborway Family Services came on a Tuesday morning, sitting innocuously in my inbox between a promotional email for diapers and a reminder about a dentist appointment. The subject line was simply, Inquiry regarding Case 899-21. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. Dear Ms. Foster, we have forwarded your contact information to the individual listed in the file. She has expressed a willingness to communicate. She asked that we pass along this message. I have been waiting for the phone to ring for 32 years. I am ready whenever you are. Her contact information is below. Emily Harlow, Riverton Springs. I stared at the name. It wasn't a ghost anymore. It was an email address and a phone number. It was a person who lived 2 hours away, who bought groceries and paid bills, and perhaps looked at the mirror and saw my face staring back at her. We exchanged 3 emails. They were polite, terrifyingly tentative. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just asked if I liked coffee. I drove to Riverton Springs on a Thursday. I told my boss I had a migraine. I told Ryan the truth. He offered to come with me, standing in the driveway with his hands in his pockets, looking torn between protecting me and giving me space. I need to do this alone. I said, I need to know who I am when I'm not being a wife or a mother or a daughter. I need to see if I recognize her. Riverton Springs was a river town, slightly larger than Maplebridge, with a downtown area that had been revitalized with brick walkways and artisanal bakeries. The cafe she chose was called The River's Edge. It was quiet, smelling of roasted beans and rain. I walked in at 11 o'clock. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful sound that felt at odds with the sledgehammer pounding in my chest. I scanned the room, a student with headphones, a young couple arguing in hushed tones, and a woman sitting alone at a table by the window, staring out at the gray water of the river. I stopped breathing. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror that showed me my own future. She had my chin, that slightly stubborn, pointed chin that I had always hated. She had my hair, though hers was streaked with gray and cut in a short, practical bob, and when she turned her head at the sound of my approach, she had my eyes, green, with flecks of gold. I walked over. My legs felt like they were moving through molasses. Emily? I asked. She stood up. She was shorter than me. She was wearing a simple blue sweater and jeans. Her hands were gripping the back of the chair so hard her knuckles were white. Claire, she breathed. She didn't hug me. She looked like she wanted to, like every muscle in her body was straining toward me, but she held back. She respected the space that 32 years of silence had built between us. Please, sit, she said. Her voice was soft, melodic. It sounded like the voice on the cassette tape, but older, more tired. I sat. She sat. I ordered a black coffee. She was drinking tea. I don't know how to start this. I said honestly, I have rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in my head. Emily said, a sad smile touching her lips. And now that you are here, I can't remember a single word. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photo album. She slid it across the table. I didn't want you to think I forgot, she said. I opened it. It wasn't a baby book. It was a collection of stolen moments. A photo of me at age 5, taken from a distance at a park. A clipping from the Maple Bridge Gazette when I won the spelling bee in 5th grade. A printout of my engagement announcement from the newspaper. You were watching. I whispered, always. She said, Eleanor sent me updates. Until she got sick. She was my lifeline. Why? I asked. The question came out sharper than I intended. Why did you give me up? Linda told me you were overwhelmed, that you weren't ready. Emily flinched. She looked down at her tea. Is that what they told you? She asked. That is the official story. I said. Emily took a deep breath. She looked out at the river, gathering herself. I was 21, she said. I was working 2 jobs. My parents had passed away the year before in a car accident. I was alone in the world. Claire. Truly alone. When I got pregnant, Paul was my landlord. Did they tell you that? No. I said, I was renting a small apartment above one of his storage units. Emily said, I was behind on rent. When he found out I was pregnant, he brought Linda over. They were intense. They told me I had no family support. They told me I would be dragging a child into poverty. They told me they could give you a life I could only dream of. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. They made me feel like keeping you would be an act of selfishness, she said. They made me feel like if I loved you, I had to let you go. Eleanor was different. She tried to help me find a way to keep you. She offered to let me live in her house. But Paul shut it down. He said it would be too confusing for the child. He said it had to be a clean break. A clean break, I repeated. That is the phrase Linda used. Emily nodded. Her expression hardened. But there was a condition. She said. She leaned forward. I didn't just walk away. Claire, I had leverage, or I thought I did. My parents, they didn't leave me much money, but they left me a small piece of land, a sliver of lakefront property in Larkridge Cove. It was next to a plot Eleanor owned. My heart skipped a beat. The cabin, I said. Emily nodded. When Paul's business started to struggle, this was right before you were born, he wanted to develop that land. He needed the combined parcel to make it viable for a larger loan. Eleanor knew this. She proposed a deal. She told Paul that if I signed over my interest in the land to the trust, he had to agree to a specific financial arrangement. What arrangement? I asked. Emily took a sip of tea, her hand shaking slightly. The profits from the eventual sale of that land were supposed to be split. She said, 50% into a trust for you, accessible when you turn 32, and 50% to me. To you? I asked. To help me go back to school, Emily said. To help me buy a house. To compensate me for the trauma of giving up my child. It was Eleanor's way of trying to balance the scales. She felt guilty that her son was taking my baby. She wanted to make sure I wasn't left with nothing. I stared at her. You owned half the cabin. I said, technically, yes, Emily said. I signed the deed transfer to the foster trust on the day you were born. It was part of the adoption paperwork. Paul swore to me, he looked me in the eye and swore, that the land would be held as an investment for our future, yours and mine. I felt a wave of nausea. He sold it. I said, he sold it to a company called Silverline. Emily closed her eyes. I know, she whispered. I found out 5 years ago. I tried to contact Paul. He blocked my number. I called Eleanor, but her dementia had set in. She just kept crying and saying she was sorry. So you never got the money? I said, not a dime, Emily said. I waited. I worked as a waitress. I took out loans for nursing school. I struggled. Claire, I struggled for 20 years waiting for a promise that never came. And then I realized they were never going to pay me. They were hoping I would just disappear. Why didn't you sue them? I asked. Emily looked at me. Because of you. She said simply, me? If I sued them, Emily said, I would have to expose the adoption. I would have to drag your name into court. I didn't know if you knew. I didn't know if you were happy. I was terrified that if I blew up their lives, I would be blowing up yours too. I didn't want to be the reason you lost your family. So I swallowed it, just like I swallowed the grief of losing you. I reached across the table. I didn't think about it. I just reached out and took her hand. Her skin was rougher than mine, warmer. They told me Eleanor was the manipulator. I said, Paul said she held the cabin over their heads. Emily squeezed my hand. Eleanor was the only one fighting for the truth. She said, she fought to keep the doors open. She wanted you to know me. She wanted us to have weekends together. Paul was the one who insisted on the silence. He was paranoid that if you knew me, you wouldn't love him as much. He wanted to own you. Claire. Completely. I sat back, pulling my hand away. The puzzle pieces were slamming into place with the force of a train wreck. The junk in the attic, the panic over the lock, the tax bill. It wasn't just about hiding an adoption, it was about grand larceny. Paul had stolen a property interest from a vulnerable 21-year-old woman, used it to prop up his failing business, and then sold it to a developer to cover his tracks, all while using my name as a shield. He used me. I said, he used my existence to steal from you. Emily looked sad, deeply, profoundly sad. He was desperate. She said, I try to tell myself that. He was a man drowning, and he grabbed the only life raft he could find. But he drowned me to save himself. And me. I said, he drowned me too. He just didn't tell me I was underwater until now. The drive back to Maplebridge felt different. The landscape looked sharper. The colors more vivid. The fog that had shrouded my mind for days was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I didn't go home. I drove straight to my parents' house. It was dinner time. I knew they would be there. I knew they would be sitting at their kitchen table, eating a sensible meal, pretending that the world hadn't ended 3 days ago. I walked in without knocking. I still had my key. They were eating pot roast. The smell of savory beef and onions filled the house, a smell that used to mean comfort, now smelling like deception. Paul dropped his fork. Linda froze. A glass of water halfway to her mouth. Claire. Linda breathed. You came back. I walked to the table. I stood at the end, looking down at them. I met Emily. I said, the silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Paul's face went white, then a mottled red. You what? He whispered. I went to Riverton Springs. I said, I met her. She told me about the deal. Dad. She told me about her half-interest in the Larkridge cabin. She told me that you promised her 50% of the proceeds for her education. Paul stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward. She is a liar, he shouted. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She is a bitter, ungrateful woman who couldn't handle the consequences of her own choices. She signed the deed, I said calmly. I saw the copy in the box, but I didn't understand the context until today. You didn't just break a will. Dad, you committed fraud against the birth mother of your child. You stole her equity. I gave her a chance, Paul yelled. I took her bastard child and gave it a name. I gave her a clean slate. She owes me. I flinched at the word bastard. It hung in the air, ugly and archaic. Linda stood up, reaching for Paul's arm. Paul, stop, she pleaded. No. Paul shook her off. I am done tiptoeing around this. You think you are so high and mighty. Claire, you think you are the victim? You are dragging strangers into our private business. You are airing our dirty laundry to a woman who abandoned you. She didn't abandon me, I said, my voice rising. You maneuvered her. You used your power as her landlord and her elder to pressure her, and then you robbed her. I saved this family, Paul roared. I did what had to be done to keep a roof over your head. At the cost of your soul? I asked. Linda burst into tears. Claire, please, she sobbed. Please don't ruin what is left. We are old. We have nothing else. Don't destroy us over money. It is not about money. Mom, I said, it is about the fact that my entire life is a crime scene. I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw a man eaten alive by his own ego. I saw a woman hollowed out by her own complicity. I am going to the lawyer, I said, and I'm going to tell her everything Emily told me. Paul laughed. It was a cruel, desperate sound. Go ahead, he said. Sue your own father. See how that looks. See how the town looks at you when you destroy the people who raised you. I will take my chances, I said. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. The next morning, I forwarded my notes from the meeting with Emily to Jenna Marks. Her response came within the hour. She called me. Claire, she said, her voice serious. This changes the landscape. How? I asked. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of Horizon Path Marketing, unable to bring myself to go inside. If Emily had a documented equity interest in the property that was transferred based on a contractual promise of future payment, and that payment was never made. We are looking at theft by deception, Jenna said. And since the cabin was sold to Silverline, a company your father had a business relationship with, without recording the deed properly, we can argue conspiracy to defraud. What does that mean for the lawsuit? I asked. It means it is nuclear, Jenna said. If we file this, and we include Emily's affidavit, your parents are looking at total insolvency. The damages would exceed their assets. They would lose the house. Their retirement accounts would be garnished. And frankly, a judge might refer this to the district attorney. I closed my eyes. And Silverline? I asked. Silverline is deep pockets, Jenna said. But if we can prove they knew about the dirty title, which the tax records suggest they did, they are on the hook too. We could recover significant damages for you and for Emily. I hung up. I sat there, listening to the rain drum against the roof of the car. Total insolvency, criminal referral. I was holding the match. That evening, I had to do the hardest thing yet. Ryan had invited his parents over, Robert and Martha Cole. They were good people, simple, hard-working people who had aged 10 years in the last 5. We sat in the living room. I served coffee. The air was thick with unasked questions. Ryan told them. He held his father's hand as he explained about the box, about the adoption, about the cabin, and about Silverline. When Ryan mentioned Silverline, Robert's face went gray. He set his coffee cup down with a rattle. Silverline? He whispered. Yes, Dad, Ryan said. The cabin Claire inherited. Paul transferred it to Silverline. It looks like he was using his properties to prop up his standing with them while they were soliciting investments. Robert looked at me. His eyes were usually warm, full of a gentle, paternal affection. But now, they looked haunted. He looked at me, and he didn't see Claire, his daughter-in-law. He saw the daughter of the man who had ruined him, your father. Robert started, his voice cracking. He told me Silverline was a sure thing. He sat at my kitchen table. Claire. He drank my coffee. He told me that he was putting his own assets into it. I whispered. He was putting my assets into it. Robert put his head in his hands. We lost everything. He said, 40 years of work, gone, because of him. Martha reached out and touched his shoulder, her own eyes filling with tears. Claire, she said softly, did you know? No, I said, I swear. Martha. I didn't know until this week. Robert looked up. There was a distance in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A wall. I believe you, he said. But it is hard. It is hard to look at you and not see him. The words felt like a physical blow. I nodded. I understood. I was the fruit of the poisonous tree. We are talking to a lawyer, Ryan said. We might be able to get some of it back. Robert shook his head. I don't want his money, he said bitterly. I just want to know why he did it. He did it because he thought he was above the rules. I said, the following Monday, Jenna filed the petition. In re, the estate of Eleanor Foster. Petition for accounting and preservation of assets. It was a preliminary step, a shot across the bow. It froze everything. It prevented my parents from selling assets. It prevented Silverline from moving the title. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Maplebridge was a small city. Court filings were public record. By Wednesday, the whispers started. I walked into the grocery store and saw Mrs. Higgins, a friend of my mother's. She saw me, turned her card around, and walked the other way. My phone started ringing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Local reporters. Ms. Foster, do you have a comment on the lawsuit filed against your parents? I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a whistleblower. I was the woman suing the pillar of the community. Jenna warned me. This story won't belong only to you anymore. She had said, she was right. It belonged to the town now. It belonged to the gossip mill. Late one night, a week after the filing, I couldn't sleep. I walked downstairs. The house was dark, save for a sliver of moonlight cutting across the living room rug. I saw movement. Mia was sitting on the floor, near the bookshelf. She was holding something. I walked closer. She was holding the old brass lock, the one Ryan had snapped off the box. We had left it on the bookshelf, a relic of the night everything changed. She was turning it over in her small hands. Mia? I whispered. She looked up. Her eyes were wide, dark pools in the moonlight. Mommy, she said. What are you doing up? Peanut? I asked, sitting down on the floor beside her. I was thinking, she said. About what? She held up the lock. It was heavy, useless now, broken. Is this the lock that made Grandma mad? She asked. I felt a physical ache in the center of my chest. It was a sharp, piercing pain. Mia didn't understand fraud. She didn't understand embezzlement or fiduciary duty. She understood that Grandma and Grandpa were mad. She understood that her mommy was crying in the bathroom. She understood that Daddy was shouting on the phone, and she associated all of it with this lock. No, baby, I said, pulling her into my lap. The lock didn't make anyone mad. The secrets did. Mia rested her head against my shoulder. Are we going to be mad forever? She asked. I kissed the top of her head, smelling the strawberry shampoo. I don't know, I whispered into her hair. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for money or for justice. I was fighting for the narrative of my daughter's life. If I stopped now, if I let them get away with it, the lesson Mia would learn was that family protects family, no matter how rotten the core. But if I proceeded, if I destroyed them, the lesson she would learn was that truth is a wrecking ball that spares no one. I took the lock from her hand. It was cold. Come on, I said. Let's go back to bed. I carried her upstairs. But as I laid her down, I knew the answer to her question. We wouldn't be mad forever, but we would never be the same. The Foster family, the happy, quiet, respectable Foster family, was dead. It had died 32 years ago in a hospital room in Briar Glen. I was just finally burying the body. The days leading up to the hearing were a blur of restless nights and disjointed dreams. I would fall asleep and find myself standing in a long, narrow hallway lined with doors. Some were made of heavy oak, bound in iron. Others were glass, fragile and transparent. I would run down the hallway, trying to find the one that led to safety, but every handle I turned was locked. I would wake up sweating, the phantom sensation of cold brass lingering on my palm. Unsure if I was trying to break out or break in, the conflict was a physical weight in my chest. I looked at Mia, playing innocently with her blocks, and felt a fierce desire to burn everything down to protect her future. Then I would look at a photo of my parents from my college graduation, Paul beaming, Linda wiping a tear, and feel a nausea so profound it nearly brought me to my knees. These were the people who had bandaged my scraped knees. These were the people who had sat in the front row of every school play. Was it possible to love a monster? Was it possible that the monster and the parent were the same person? The morning of the hearing arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. Rain slashed against the windows of the county courthouse, a brutalist concrete block that seemed designed to strip away hope. Ryan drove, his hand resting on my knee, a silent anchor in the storm. We walked in together. Jenna Marks was already there, looking sharp and formidable in a charcoal suit. She handed me a coffee, her eyes scanning the hallway. "They are here," she said quietly. I looked down the corridor. Paul and Linda were sitting on a wooden bench. They looked like strangers. Paul, usually so commanding, looked shrunken inside his suit jacket. Linda was wearing a gray cardigan that seemed to swallow her whole. She was staring at the floor, her hands twisting a tissue into a tight white rope. We didn't speak. We walked into the hearing room, a sterile space with fluorescent lights and the smell of floor wax. The hearing was technically a preliminary session to determine the validity of the trust claim and the preservation of assets. But it felt like an autopsy. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Holloway with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, called the session to order. Jenna wasted no time. She laid out the timeline with surgical precision: the adoption, the amended will, the transfer of the cabin, the sale to Silverline. Then, she called Linda to the stand. My mother walked up the aisle as if she were walking to the gallows. She took the oath in a whisper. "Mrs. Foster?" Jenna asked, her voice calm but penetrating. "Were you aware of the conditions in Eleanor Foster's will regarding the Larkridge property?" Linda looked at Paul. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "Yes," Linda whispered. "And were you aware that your husband transferred that property to a third party before the beneficiary, Claire Foster, turned 32? Linda began to cry. It was a silent weeping, tears tracking through her powder. I trusted him," she said. "Paul said he had a plan. He said he was going to invest the money and put it back into the trust. He said it was the only way to save the business. Did you ever see the money go back into the trust?" Jenna asked. "No," Linda admitted. She looked at me then, her eyes pleading. "I asked him, over the years. I asked him. He always said it was tied up." He said, "Don't worry, Linda, I will fix it." I wanted to believe him. I just wanted everything to be okay. I looked away. Her weakness was almost harder to watch than her malice would have been. She had traded her integrity for the illusion of safety. Then, it was Paul's turn. He walked to the stand with a remnant of his old swagger. But it was brittle. He sat down, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Foster," Jenna said, "you heard your wife's testimony. Did you sell the Larkridge cabin to pay off business debts?" "I did what I had to do," Paul said, his voice booming slightly in the small room. Foster Ridge was under attack. Frivolous lawsuits, economic downturns. I had a responsibility to my family, to Claire. I used that asset to keep food on the table, to keep the lights on. So it was a desperate measure for survival? Jenna asked. "Yes," Paul said. "Absolutely." Jenna nodded. She walked back to her table and picked up a stack of documents. "Mr. Foster, these are bank records from Foster Family Holdings, the shell company you used to receive the funds from Silverline." Paul stiffened. Jenna placed the papers in front of him. "Can you explain why? 3 weeks after the transfer of the cabin funds, you purchased a 24-foot pontoon boat?" The room went silent. Paul blinked. That was for client entertainment. It was a business expense." "And the membership fees for the Cypress Creek Country Club?" Jenna asked. $10,000 initiation. $500 a month. Was that also to keep the lights on?" "Networking," Paul said, sweat beading on his forehead. "You don't understand how business works. And this," Jenna said, pointing to a line item, "a trip to Aruba, 2 weeks, 5-star resort, dated 4 months after the sale, while you were allegedly drowning in debt." Paul didn't answer. He looked at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. Linda let out a gasp. I turned to look at her. She was staring at Paul with a look of pure horror. "You told me we used that money for the lawyers," she whispered. Her voice carried across the quiet room. "You told me we couldn't afford a vacation for 5 years. You went to Aruba?" Paul looked at her. I needed a break. Linda, the stress was killing me. "You stole my daughter's inheritance and went to the beach?" I asked. I hadn't meant to speak, but the words tore out of my throat. Judge Holloway banged her gavel. "Order," she said sharply, but she looked at Paul with a gaze that could have stripped paint. The representative from Silverline was next, a slick corporate attorney named Mr. Henderson. He testified that Silverline had relied on the documents provided by Paul, which stated he had full authority to sell. We had no knowledge of any internal family disputes or unrecorded trust conditions, Henderson said smoothly. We are a good faith purchaser, Jenna countered. You paid property taxes for 10 years under the name Claire Eleanor Foster, she said. You didn't think it was odd that the deed wasn't fully recorded? We assumed it was a clerical delay on the seller's end, Henderson said. We are victims here as well. Judge Holloway took off her glasses. Mr. Henderson, she said, it strains credulity that a company of your size would acquire a property with such a clouded title without doing due diligence. However, that is a matter for trial. What is clear today is that the internal family agreements were flagrantly violated. She looked at Paul and Linda. I am freezing all assets of Foster Family Holdings and the personal accounts of Paul and Linda Foster, pending a full audit. We will recess for 2 hours. I suggest you use this time to speak with the mediator, because if this goes to trial, based on what I have seen today, the consequences will be severe. The hallway during the recess felt like a pressure cooker. I walked out, feeling lightheaded. Ryan was there, holding a bottle of water, and standing near the window were 3 people I hadn't expected to see together. Emily, Ryan's parents, Robert and Martha, and my brother, Chris. I hadn't seen him in the hearing room. He must have slipped in the back. He was 5 years older than me, the biological son of Paul and Linda. We had never been close. He had moved to Chicago as soon as he graduated, coming home only for Christmas, always maintaining a polite, cool distance. Claire, Chris said. He looked tired. He looked like Paul. Around the eyes. I didn't know you were coming. I said, Mom called me. Chris said. He looked at Emily, then at me. She told me everything. Or her version of it. And? I asked. Chris sighed. He ran a hand through his hair. I knew. Claire. The words hung in the air. What? I whispered. I knew you were adopted, he said. I found out when I was 16. I found the papers in Dad's desk. I stared at him. The brother I had shared a bathroom with. The brother who had taught me how to ride a bike. You knew? I said. And you never told me? They made me promise. Chris said. His voice was miserable. Mom. She came into my room crying. She said if I told you, it would destroy the family. She said you would leave us. She said it would kill her. She put all that on me. Claire, I was a kid. I didn't know what to do. So I pulled away. I couldn't look at you without feeling guilty. So I just stopped looking. I felt a rush of vertigo, the distance, the coldness. It wasn't because I was annoying. It wasn't because we were different. It was because he was carrying the weight of the lie, too. You let me live in the dark, I said. For 16 years. I am sorry. Chris said. I know that doesn't mean much. But I am. Emily stepped forward. She looked small next to Chris, but her presence was grounding. Claire, she said softly, breathe. I looked at her, the woman who had given me up, the woman who had been robbed, and I looked at Robert and Martha, Ryan's parents. They were standing close to each other, looking at Chris and me with pity. This whole family, Robert said, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. It is just a web. Every strand is a lie. The mediation room was small, with a round table that forced us all to look at each other. Jenna sat next to me. On the other side sat Paul, Linda, and their lawyer, a court-appointed man who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Jenna opened a folder. We have 2 paths, she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact. Path 1, she continued. We proceed to trial. We will amend the complaint to include civil theft, fraud, and conspiracy. We will depose everyone. We will subpoena the travel records for Aruba, the receipts for the boat. We will bring Emily Harlow to the stand to testify about the coercion and the stolen equity. We will bring Robert and Martha Cole to testify about the Silverline investments. She paused, letting the weight of it settle. The result, almost certainly, will be a judgment in the millions. You will lose your home. You will lose your pension. And, given the evidence of embezzlement, Judge Holloway will likely refer this to the district attorney. Paul, you could be looking at 5 to 10 years in prison. Linda, you could be charged as an accessory. Paul didn't move. He was staring at the table, his face gray. Path 2, Jenna said. We settle today. She slid a document across the table. You liquidate your assets, the house, the cars, the boat, the remaining savings. The proceeds go to a restitution fund, 50% to Emily Harlow, to repay her stolen equity, 25% to the Silver Line victims, specifically the Cole family, 25% to Claire. You sign a full admission of wrongdoing, which will be sealed under a non-disclosure agreement, no criminal referral. You avoid prison, but you leave this room with nothing but your clothes and your Social Security. The room was silent. The hum of the air conditioner sounded like a roar. Linda reached out and grabbed the document. Her hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. We will take it, she gasped. We will take it. Please, Claire. She looked at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, desperate holes in her face. Please, she begged. Don't send your father to prison. Don't make us the monsters everyone already wants to believe we are. We will give you everything. The house, the money. Just let us keep our freedom. Let us go away somewhere quiet. Please. I looked at Paul. He wasn't begging. He was looking at me with a strange, hard expression. Is this what you want? He asked. His voice was raspy. I want the truth. I said, You have the truth. Paul said, I stole it. I spent it. I lied about it. There, that is your truth. He leaned forward. But if you want to punish us, if you really want to hurt us, then don't hide behind a settlement. Go all the way. Put me on the stand. Send me to jail. Own it. Claire, if you are going to destroy your father, have the guts to do it in public. Paul! Linda shrieked. Stop it! I looked at him. He was trying to bluff me. He was trying to use my own morality against me, betting that I was too weak to pull the trigger. I looked at Emily. She was sitting in a chair against the wall, watching. What do you want? I asked her. Emily stood up. She walked over to the table. I don't want his money, she said quietly. I never did. I wanted you to know I didn't abandon you. I wanted you to know I loved you. I have that now. She looked at Paul. You can't pay me for 32 years. Paul, keep your money, or give it to the people you scammed. I just want to be done with you. I looked at Robert, Ryan's dad. He was standing by the door. Robert? I asked. He looked at Paul. He looked at the man who had been his friend, the man who had talked him into financial ruin. I want to see him pay. Robert said, his voice was thick with emotion, I want to see him held accountable. It would help me sleep, knowing he didn't get away with it. He paused, looking at me. But Claire, you are the one who has to live with this. You are the one who has to explain this to Mia. I don't want to be the reason you destroy your own parents. I don't want that blood on my hands. The door opened. The bailiff poked his head in. Judge Holloway is ready for you, he said. We walked back into the courtroom. The atmosphere had shifted. It was heavier now. Final. I stood at the plaintiff's table. Jenna was beside me, on the other side. Paul and Linda stood like statues. Judge Holloway looked down at us. Have the parties reached a resolution? She asked. Jenna looked at me. Claire? She whispered. I looked down at my hands. I was holding Eleanor's letter. The paper was worn soft from how many times I had touched it. You are the one who gets to decide what happens next. I looked at the settlement papers. A signature would end it. It would bury the shame. It would leave them destitute, but free. It was the clean way. I looked at the courtroom door. It was glass, with wire mesh inside it. Through the glass, sitting on a bench in the hallway, was Mia. Ryan was sitting next to her, reading a magazine. But Mia was occupied. She was holding the old brass lock. She was turning it over and over in her hands. I watched her. My daughter. The next generation. If I signed the settlement, I was doing exactly what Paul and Linda had done. I was burying the truth to keep the peace. I was hiding the ugliness to protect the family image. I was choosing the comfortable lie over the brutal truth. Don't open the locked one. Daddy. Mia had been taught to fear the truth. She had been taught that opening the box made people mad. If I signed that paper, I was validating that fear. I was teaching her that when people do bad things, you make a deal in a back room and you hush it up. But if I refused, I became the daughter who sent her father to prison. I became the arsonist who burned down the family tree. I looked at Paul. He was watching me, his eyes challenging, daring me. You are weak, his eyes said. You are a foster. We keep secrets. I looked at Emily. She gave me a small nod. You are free. I looked at Jenna. I took the pen from the table. I looked at the settlement agreement, the confidentiality clause, the non-disparagement clause, the silence. I thought about the dreams, the hallway of doors. I realized then that there was no key. There never had been. The only way to open the door was to break it down. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, I said. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. I looked at the settlement papers one last time. I thought about the boat, the trip to Aruba, the lies to Emily, the theft from Ryan's parents, the 32 years of silence. I put the pen down. We have not reached a resolution. I said. A gasp went through the room. Linda made a sound like a wounded animal. Paul's face went slack, the arrogance draining out of him in a rush. I turned to Jenna. Take it to trial. I said loud enough for them to hear. Put it all on the record, every dime, every lie. But Claire, Jenna whispered, the fallout. I know. I said. I looked through the glass door at Mia. She looked up, as if she heard me. She smiled and held up the lock. I smiled back. I am not doing this for revenge. I thought, I am doing this so she never has to carry a key to a box she's afraid to open. I turned back to the judge. We are ready to proceed. Your Honor, I said, and as the gavel came down, echoing like a thunderclap through the room, I finally felt the weight lift. The box was open, the lock was broken, and for the first time in 32 years, the air I breathed was my own. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope Claire's journey resonated with you. It's a heavy one, but I believe that sometimes the hardest truths are the only ones that can set us free. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories so you don't miss the next one. What would you have done in Claire's shoes? Would you have signed the settlement? Or would you have taken it to trial? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Until next time.